Hi, the purpose of this video is to explain what you're going to do with this kit. Now, it's your lucky day. You either received this kit from me in my office or the lab mailed it to you directly. Either way, you've got it in hand, and it's the ASI test, the Adrenal Stress Index test by DiagnosTechs. I love this test. It tells us whether or not you have adrenal fatigue, and if so, if you have stage 1, stage 2, or stage 3, so that we can get to treating you and getting you feeling better. Now, there's a variety of reasons that you may have this kit in your hands, and I'll go into another video that explains the reasons why you might want to be taking this test kit. But let's go ahead and get started. You got your kit in the mail. You're going to go ahead and you're going to open it up. And it looks like that. So inside here, we have our instruction booklet. We have our collection vials that are going to collect our salivary samples. We have our pre-postage paid label that we're going to stick on the test kit when it's all done. And then we have the requisition form here. Now let's look at our instruction booklet. This is for the Adrenal Stress Index panel, and it's pretty thorough. So just by reading through this a few days before you're going to take the test, familiarizing yourself so that you're not scrambling on the day of the test is a good idea, but I'm going to go ahead and review it with you now. So for this same test kit is used for the Adrenal Stress Index test, also for just a basic adrenal test that only includes 4 or 5 cortisol and the DHEA, and it doesn't have the other markers that we're talking about with the Adrenal Stress Index testing. It's the same collection regardless of what test you're using. Now, this test is measuring our response to stress. So ideally, you're going to take this test on a normal or typical working day if you're a working person. If you're retired, congratulations. You can just pretty much take this on any typical day. If you're work 6 days a week and you're off 1 day a week, you want to definitely take it during a work day because your stress levels are typically different on work days versus days of rest. Also, you wouldn't want to take it while on a vacation because typically your stress levels shouldn't be as high on vacation days as they are during work days. And we really are wanting to see how you are handling your current stress level. Again, we want to make sure that the lab receives the test on time. So ideally, you will take this test on a Sunday, a Monday, or a Tuesday so that it can be mailed to the lab on a Monday, a Tuesday, or a Wednesday. If we mail Thursday or Friday, it's going to sit in a mailbox, could be exposed to extreme temperatures while we wait for the lab to get back on Monday morning. So that's not ideal. We want it to get to the lab by Friday so that the lab can keep it properly stored over the weekend. 3 to 5 days prior to your collection, unless I've told you otherwise, you want to stop dissolving any kind of sublingual hormone preparations in your mouth. This includes pellets or drops. Instead, I want you just to swallow them. So usually if you're taking these items, you hold them in your mouth for a little bit and let them absorb. 3 to 5 days prior to collection, we want to just swallow them down. So if you're using a liquid hormone preparation, mix it with a few ounces of water and just swallow it. Don't hold it in your mouth. For the entire day before the day you're going to test, you want to avoid all hormone preparations regardless of the form. This also includes topical progesterone, estrogen, DHEA, testosterone, things like that. Topical counts. So any hormone products, if you can skip a day, it's best to skip the day prior to the test and the day of the test. Now, if a provider other than myself prescribed you these preparations, I don't want you to stop without consulting them. Just be sure that you list the medication on the requisition form, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. If you can do without these hormone preparations, however, it's best not to take them. Now, the day of the test, you are to have no caffeine and no alcohol during the test window. So that means between the 6 a.m. morning fasting test and the midnight bedtime test. Caffeine, when you consume caffeine, regardless if it's from coffee, if it's from black or green tea, if it's from chocolate, if it's from soda, when you consume caffeine, it elevates your cortisol pretty extremely, actually. And we want to see what your body's endogenous cortisol levels are. We don't want to measure what there are when you're under the influence of any kind of stimulant. So no caffeine and no alcohol on the test day. If you absolutely have to have your glass of wine, you're going to have to wait until after you've collected the midnight or bedtime sample, which is between 10 p.m. and midnight. If you're doing the insomnia test, don't have any alcohol because you'll need to do the additional testing between 2 and 4 a.m. Other than that, there's no dietary restrictions. You just want to avoid eating anything for 1 hour prior to taking your testing sample. Let's talk a little bit more about how to actually take a sample. Now, 1 hour before each saliva collection sample, you're going to not eat or drink anything. You want to avoid smoking, brushing and flossing your teeth, using mouthwash as well. You can have water, however. Now, 3 to 5 minutes before your actual test, you want to rinse your mouth thoroughly with cold water for at least 30 seconds, but for a minute might be better. Just make sure you have a nice clean mouth and wash your hands prior to handling the collection tubes. If you find that you're experiencing difficulty getting enough saliva into the tube, there's a couple of little tricks that you can use. If you have any dental grade paraffin wax, so often if you had braces or something like that, you'd soften the edges of those with the wax. You can chew on that unflavored dental grade paraffin wax to try and get the saliva juices flowing. You can cut a lemon and smell a lemon wedge, or smell some vinegar or some pickle juice, or smell your favorite food item to promote flow of saliva. So after you smell these things or chew on the wax, you want to wait about 2 to 3 minutes and then take your collection, and this should get the juices flowing. Have a baggie that looks like this. It has an orange absorbent pad in there, and it most likely has 5 collection tubes. Now, if you're seeing me for insomnia, we will need to do a sample in the night when you're not sleeping, and there will be a 6th tube in here for you. But for most of us, we're going to be just filling up 5 tubes. So we'll go ahead and open the baggie and pull the tubes out, and we have 5 in our hands here. On every single tube, make sure that the label is stuck on well. Sometimes they're just kind of thrown on and the edges are peeling. We want to make sure that the label stays on the tube. So this one here says H vial, and on every single tube, you're going to put your name and date of birth. That's the H vial. We're going to start the day, however, with, so this is, say it's a sample test day. I've opened my kit and I've got the morning fasting tube here, and I've already written my name and date of birth on there. For the morning sample, you're going to take between 6 and 8 a.m. and you want to take it within 30 minutes of waking up. You also don't want to have eaten or drinking anything in the morning sample. You want to have had no food or other beverages besides water for a total of 6 to 8 hours. This is a fasting sample. When you wake up, get up and rinse your mouth out with cold water for about 1 to 3 minutes and spit it out. And now you're ready to take your sample. Don't brush your teeth. Don't use mouthwash. Don't have any coffee or anything like that. Only rinsing your mouth with cold water. Now, these particular tubes have a little cotton swab in there, like you get put in your mouth when you're at the dentist. So what you're going to do is you're just going to pull that cotton swab out and you're going to stick it in your mouth under your tongue and you're going to just wait. It might take up to 15 or 20 minutes, but you're going to wait for the saliva to build up in your mouth and absorb into that cotton swab. Once it's completely saturated with saliva, you're going to pull the cotton swab out of your mouth, stick it back in the tube, and make sure the lid is on tight. Now, I can't stand personally to have that cotton swab in my mouth. It makes me go like that. So I prefer to throw the cotton swab away in the garbage can and just fill the tube up with saliva directly. And you would take the lid off and just kind of hold it to your bottom lip and just spit the saliva in a little bit at a time. You'll be interested to find out that it will take you longer certain times of days than others to fill this tube up. So one time it might take you 5 minutes, another time it may take you 20 minutes. So be sure that you've left enough time in your schedule to get the testing done during the appropriate time frames. Now, if there's no cotton in your tube and you're sending it back to the lab, it's kind of hard to see on the video, but there are little lines here. If there's no cotton, you need to fill the liquid saliva at least up to the halfway mark here. I like to stick in just a little more to make sure that there's no reason for the test not to get run. Now, the sample filled up to that line needs to be liquid saliva. If you're really forcing it because you're in a hurry and you're going like that, you're going to get a lot of bubbles in your sample, and it has to be the liquid filled up that high. If you have a lot of bubbles and it's coming out the top and there's not enough liquid in there, what you can do is put the lid on tight and stick it in the freezer for about 2 to 3 minutes, and then pull it back out and give it a little tap on the countertop, and it should reduce those bubbles so that you can continue to fill the sample up to at least halfway. If you've used the cotton swab, that's fine. Just make sure it is completely saturated. Now your sample has been taken. Your name, date of birth is on there. It's the correct sample for the correct time of day. You're going to make sure the lid is on tight. I've had somebody send the lab sample to the lab, and when it arrived, the lid was off and they had to throw the test away because it was no good and redo the test. So I don't want that to happen to you. Make sure the lids are on tight. Once you have finished your sample, your name and date of birth are on it, and the lid is on tight, you're going to stick it back in your collection bag with the absorbent pad. Keep that in there, and you're going to put it in there, squish the air out, zip it up, and you're going to place this in the refrigerator and just leave it there. Now, it's an hour after your morning fasting sample, and it's time to do the sample for the H vial. So that just says that right there, H vial, and it's the same thing. You want to rinse your mouth out with cold water for 1 to 3 minutes beforehand. Don't have eaten or drinking, so you won't have had breakfast yet. No coffee, no juice, nothing like that. And it's an hour after your first sample, you're going to do the same thing. The H vial does not have the cotton swab in it, so you will have to fill it to at least that midway mark. A little bit more for good measure is always a good idea. Put the lid on, make sure your name and date of birth is in, and you're going to add it to the bag with the previous sample. Now both of them are in there. Squish the air out, zip it up, and stick it back in the refrigerator. And you're going to continue this. The next sample, and this, be sure that you get the correct tube for the correct sample. So there's 2 here. This one says noon, and this is afternoon. So the next time is the noon collection. Now, the noon sample will be taken anytime between 11 a.m. and 1 p.m. if you're doing the Adrenal Stress Index test, there are 2 insulin tests included in this particular kit. So it's important that you do the carbohydrate stimulation test that's talked about in your booklet here. Basically, say you're going to do your sample at 1 p.m. An hour before that sample, you need to have completed eating lunch. And during lunch, you need to consume 75 grams of carbohydrate. Rinse your mouth out right before you take your sample. Make sure your mouth is clean. Go ahead and fill the tube or use the cotton swab that's in there. Fill it up, name and date of birth, and add it to your Ziploc baggie and stick it back in the refrigerator. The same thing is going to be repeated for the afternoon vial, and this one is our tightest window. You're going to fill the afternoon vial between 4 and 5 p.m. All of the other samples, you have a 2-hour window. For the afternoon vial, you have a 1-hour window between 4 and 5 p.m. Be sure you set your timers so that you don't miss these windows. Otherwise, you're going to have to rinse out all the vials and we'll have to start back over. So the timing is critical for the results and how we decide to treat based on those results. And then there's one final tube left, and they call it the midnight tube. And you're going to take this one between 10 p.m. and midnight. Again, either using the cotton swab that's included or just fill it up at least halfway with liquid saliva, not bubbles. Caps are on tight. Names and date of births are on every single tube. Now you are complete with the test. All 5 samples are in the baggie. Air is out. The absorbent pad is still included, and you're going to stick this back in the refrigerator while you sleep tonight. And we'll take it out tomorrow and mail it back to the lab. Now, I've already mentioned it when we went through the tubes, but just a quick review. Your morning fasting sample is going to be between 6 and 8 a.m. If you took that sample at 6 a.m., you're going to not eat or drink anything. And at 7 a.m., you're going to go ahead and fill the H vial sample. Put both of these back in the refrigerator. Now you want to think ahead to your day a little bit. What time are you planning on taking your noon sample? It needs to be taken between 11 a.m. and 1 p.m., but you need to have taken lunch and that carbohydrate stimulation 1 hour prior to this test. So think ahead. I say I want to take my noon sample at 12:30. That means that at probably about 11:15, you're going to need to eat 75 grams of carbohydrates, and you need to be finished taking that, eating that by 11:30 a.m. so that you now have an hour until you take your noontime sample at 12:30. So 11:15, I ate my 75 grams of carbohydrates. Now it's 12:30. I've taken my noontime sample, and I've set my timer for between 4 and 5 p.m. when we do the afternoon sample. And then again, between 10 p.m. and midnight is our 5th and final sample. Let's talk a little bit about the carbohydrate stimulation test. Now, if you're doing just the cortisol levels and DHEA, the less expensive adrenal test, you're not going to be doing the carbohydrate stimulation portion of this test at all, and you can just ignore this part. However, if you're doing the ASI, the Adrenal Stress Index panel, included in that are 2 insulin levels, one fasting and one postprandial or after eating. So it's important that you listen to this section, because if you don't do this properly, the data that we get from your test results will be incorrect. So again, you need to be finished eating your lunch 1 hour prior to taking that lunch sample. So calculate what time that's going to be. And you need to consume 75 grams of carbohydrate. I'm going to give you a list of foods and the serving size that is equivalent to 15 grams of carbohydrates. So you can pick 5 of these to equal your 75 grams of carbohydrate. So all of these things I'm going to list now, each food and portion size equals 15 grams of carbohydrate. 1 slice of white or wheat bread, 1/3 of a cup of cooked white or brown rice, a half a cup of cooked white or wheat pasta, 1/3 of a cup of dried beans or peas, cooked, I hope, 3 cups of popcorn that has been air popped, 1 6-inch tortilla, a half a cup of mashed potatoes, 1 cup of squash cubes, a half a cup of apple or orange juice, 1 small fruit, like 1 small apple or 1 small orange, 3/4 cups of blueberries. I prefer the Wyman's frozen blueberries. They have the most bang for your buck, and 1/4 cup of dried fruit. So pick 5 of those, or 2 of one, 2 of another, 1 of another. However you do it, get a total of 75 grams of carbohydrate in that meal. You can have other things like fat and protein as well, but you've got to have the 75 grams of carbohydrate, and make sure you're finished eating 1 hour prior to taking that noontime collection. Let's talk about how to fill out the requisition form. So it looks like this, and there's 2 sides to it. Now, if you received your lab kit from me directly in my office, I would have filled out my portion of the lab requisition form. However, if the lab shipped it to you directly, obviously I haven't had my hands on it, so I have not filled out that portion, and it'll be up to you to do that. Let's go ahead and review how to properly fill this requisition form out so that there's no reason that your test won't get analyzed. So let's start at the top front page of this. We have over here the white section, and this is asking for my information. So the top line here asks for the provider's name. So there you would list my name if I'm the one ordering this for you. And my name is Toni, T-O-N-I. My last name's Etros, E-A-T-R-O-S. The line under that is asking for my NPI number. This is a number that is assigned to healthcare practitioners. I'm not going to list it on the video here, but you will receive either a phone call or an email from me that includes this number, and you'll just want to go ahead and write it on this second line here. And then these final boxes here, we'll probably most likely just fill in 1 set of them. And this is the ICD-10 code, also known as the diagnosis code. So you'll get this code from me as well. And it's pretty much going to be the reason that you're taking this test. So do you have fatigue? Do you have blood sugar issues? Do you have digestive issues, insomnia, hormone issues? The list goes on as to why you might be taking this test. So I'll be sure to give that number to you. Now we're going to move on over here to the gray section. And this is where you're going to fill out your information. So the top line here is asking for your last name, and then your first name, date of birth, and whether or not you were born male or female. Now, if you have had a sex change and you are taking hormones, I'm going to advise you to call DiagnosTechs directly and ask them what you should check, if you should check male or female, because I'm not sure how the sex hormones will affect the test, and they'll have a better idea on that. The phone number to the lab, the DiagnosTechs lab, is area code 425-251-0596, and you can let them clarify that for you. But for most of us, we know whether or not we're born male or female, and we're not taking extra hormones. The next line is asking for our billing address, our city, state, zip, country, telephone number. And then this last line here is asking for the institution or clinic ID number. Just leave that blank or cross a line through it. And the most important part of this requisition are these 2 bubbled in questions here. The top line asks you, are you a resident of New York State? Yes or no. Now, if you are seasonal and you saw me in Florida, because that's where you are in the wintertime, even if you are a legal resident of New York State, I want you to put no. Because if you put yes on either one of that, if you're a resident of New York State, or if the sample was taken in New York State, the lab will not process your lab kit. So even if your driver's license is New York, but you are in Florida right now and taking that test in Florida, you are going to bubble in no for both of these so that your test can get processed. I guess the labs have a lot more hoops to jump for that aren't economically feasible for residents of New York State. Also, residents of New Jersey and Rhode Island sometimes have the inability to have tests run as well. So if that's the case for you, I'll be sure to let you know, and we won't even be having this discussion because you won't be able to take that test. So you fill in no for both of those. You're not a New York State resident and you're not taking the sample in New York State. And then if you come over here, it's asking us this first box, what is the date that your last sample was taken? So for example, today is the 16th of the month. I'm preparing and my plan is to take the test on the 17th of the month. Now for this particular test, all samples are included on the same day. So every single sample, you would write the 17th. So May 17th, 2020 in this box here. And then the next one is asking you what day the samples were shipped. Because you're taking a midnight sample and keeping the samples in the refrigerator overnight, this box will have the date the next day, which would be May 18th, 2020. So those dates are really important and it helps the lab in their calculations. Let's move on to section 2. All right, section 2 is asking what tests are we actually going to run? So if you're doing the ASI test, the Adrenal Stress Index panel, you're just going to bubble in this very top one right here and leave the rest of it blank. Now, if we're doing this test because you have insomnia, we're going to need to come over to this area, and it's kind of hard to see on the thing. We're going to check that cortisol, other, and specified time, bubble that in. So, and then in this line here, we're going to write between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. on the sheet, because that's when you'll be doing your insomnia sample. And you'll probably set your alarm, but if you have insomnia, likely you'll be up in that time frame between 2 and 4 a.m. Leave the rest of that blank. And then let's go down to section 3 here. This is how your test kit is being paid for. You've already paid me for this test kit, so you're just going to circle in box number 1 here, bill physician and clinic. Now, if you got this from me, I will have already printed and signed and dated the form there. If it was mailed directly from the lab, you'll just write my name in there or write phone order, and the fact that you received the kit, the lab knows that I have authorized for you to take this test. You just cross out box 2, 3, and 4 here and leave them blank. Now, I know it says insurance there, but insurance rarely pays for it. And if you check that box, often you end up paying more for the test kit when trying to use your insurance than you would if you just have the cash price. So I have charged you the cash price, you have paid me, and the lab is just going to come to me for payment. So that just gets you off the hook and leave the rest of it blank. Now let's flip the lab requisition over to the back side. So the top of it here is section 4, and this again is showing us the time when we're going to go ahead and take the different samples. So it's reminding us the morning fasting sample is between 6 and 8 a.m. But over in these blank lines, you're going to write the exact time that you took that test. So If you took it at 7:30, you're going to write 7:30 a.m. there. Now the H vial is down at the bottom here. That's going to be taken 1 hour after your morning or fasting vial. So then over here, we would be writing 8:30 a.m. And then the noon is between 11 and 1. Write the exact time you took it. Afternoon between 4 and 5. Write the exact time that you took it. The midnight or bedtime sample between 10 p.m. and midnight. Write what time you took that sample. Now, if we did the cortisol, the extra nighttime cortisol between 2 and 4 a.m., you would write the time that you took it on this bottom line here. If you are not doing the insomnia sample, you'll just leave that one blank. Now, if you're doing only the cortisol and DHEA, the less expensive test, you're going to just leave this other section over here blank. If you're doing the Adrenal Stress Index test with the carbohydrate stimulation test to check for pre and postprandial insulin levels, this part talks about our food intake is extremely important. So again, your morning fasting sample, you shouldn't have eaten for 6 to 8 hours prior, so we're just going to leave that blank. Now, it's the noontime one, and you're going to write down what time you ate that carbohydrate stimulation, 75 grams of carbohydrates, what time you ate that meal, and then same for before the afternoon. If you've had anything else to eat, you're going to write that there, and before the bedtime, when the last time that you ate was. You're going to go ahead and list on that line there. Now let's move down to the next line. Here it's asking for the date your samples are collected. This should match the front when your last sample was taken here. So just be sure that you're consistent on the front and the back of these forms. So in our sample, we would say May 17th, 2020 was the date that the samples were collected. Now, the next question is asking if you have bleeding gums or if you've been diagnosed with gingivitis. If yes or no, you're going to bubble that in over here. The next question is, do you work a swing shift? So are you working at night and sleeping in the day? If so, we need to adjust your cortisol rhythm based on the hours you're awake, and it won't default to the normal 24-hour cortisol cycle. So that is super important if you are a night shift worker or if you have sporadic shifts where you sleep any time of the day or night, you definitely want to check yes there. The next question here is, did you perform the carbohydrate stimulation test? Yes or no? Did you eat that 75 grams of carbohydrate 1 hour prior to your noontime sample? Yes or no? And then the final question here is for females only. Men, you can just skip this. It's asking if you have a menstrual cycle, yes or no. If you do have a menstrual cycle, what day of your cycle was this test taken? Now we calculate this based on day 1 being the first day of menstrual flow, and then just count ahead to figure out what day it is that you're taking this test and write it down. And then it's also asking you what's your average cycle length. So are you fabulous and you have a 28 cycle day, or is it a little bit too fast and it's more like a 23-day cycle, or is it too long like a 60-day cycle? So this just helps the lab in their analysis, and be sure to fill that part in. Now we're to the final portion of the requisition form. It's the bottom of the second page there, and this is where we're going to list if we're taking any of these medications. Even if you have stopped it for the day or two prior to the test, you will want to list it on here. So if you take progesterone, pregnenolone, DHEA, prednisone, dexamethasone, a steroid inhaler, steroid nasal spray, steroid eye drops, corticosteroid cream, hemorrhoid cream, hydrocortisone cream, hydrocortisone lip balm, antihistamines and decongestants, I have a lot of patients who take these on a daily basis all year round. If you're taking antihistamines or decongestants, you need to write it down on this list. And if at all possible, try to stop taking those for a couple of days prior to the test and the day of the test. Also, if you take any kind of antidepressant or anti-anxiety medication, you'll want to write it down there. And if you have been taking any kind of an adrenal support product, you'll want to check the label and see if there's any adrenal glandulars in there. All of these medications could potentially interfere with your test results, and we want to make sure we have the most accurate information available. So if you are taking any of these, you'll want to list the exact name of your prescription, the dosing, the frequency that you take it, and the date and time that you last took it. So if it was 3 days ago, you still want to list it on here and write that you took it on May 14th, for instance. If you have anything else that you're taking that you think might interfere with your test results, just write it under other or in patient comments there. So that concludes filling out the requisition form. Congratulations, you've done it. We have finished the test. Our samples are in the refrigerator overnight, and now it's the next morning and we're ready to send it in. So we're going to include our filled out completely requisition form, and we're going to stick that in the box there. We've got our baggie that's zipped tightly with 5 or 6 vials on there. Each vial has your name and date of birth written on it, and the absorbent pad is still in here. Lids are on tight. You're going to stick that into the box as well, and go ahead, close that box up. You're going to pull out the shipping label. This is a UPS shipping label, and it is prepaid. So you're going to take the back part off. You're going to stick it onto your box there, write your return address, and you're going to drop this off at any UPS store. It is postage prepaid, so you'll just have to hand it to the representative at the store, and they will take care of the rest from there. If you can't make it to the UPS store and you're going to be in the same location all day, you can call UPS and ask them to come pick it up. However, you do need to be present. You can't just leave it outside the door for them to pick up, and you can arrange for that over the telephone. I just want to review a couple of frequently asked questions regarding this test. First, how long does it take to get my test results? I know that as soon as you get this done, you're just chomping at the bit to get the results, and so am I. Usually, it takes a few days to get to the lab, and then it'll take 1 to 2 weeks after the lab receives it for me to get your test results. Now, that kind of depends on how busy the lab is. If the lab isn't very busy, it's going to come faster. If they are busy, it could be, around that 2-week mark. Second question, if I collect my samples outside of the designated time frame, will this affect our test results? And the answer to that is yes. What we're trying to do is get a picture as to how your cortisol flows throughout the day. And so having those specified time increments gives us a really great picture of that. So really do your best to try and get your sample taken within the designated time for each one of those vials. What if you put your sample into the wrong vial? Well, you could just switch the labels. That would be the easiest thing to do. So say you accidentally put your sample for noon into the afternoon sample and you realized at afternoon that you spit into the wrong one, just pull those labels off and switch it. If the label won't remove, cross out and write the correct label for that particular sample. What if you brushed your teeth or ate some kind of food or beverage other than water less than an hour before taking your sample? Unfortunately, you'll need to recollect. If you didn't wait enough time and you accidentally took it, you'll need to start over the next day. It has to be an hour after eating or drinking any kind of food. Same with cigarette smoking, so be really careful there. Don't have any thing to smoke within that hour time frame before collecting your sample. I'm a resident of New York State. Can I take the sample? The answer is unfortunately no. You'll need to go to a different state in order to take this test. How much is the test? Well, this is individual depending on how many samples you're doing. If you're doing the extra insomnia sample, if you're doing the less expensive chest cortisol and DHEA, or if you're doing the ASI test. So just contact my office and I'll be happy to go over those different options with you and the prices that they will be. And if you need an itemized statement for your lab, for your lab test, you'll just contact my office and I'll be happy to send that to you. All right, happy testing. I can't wait for you to get your test results, and we will be in contact to review those and come up with your personalized, individualized treatment plan based on every single one of those samples. I look forward to working with you, and thanks for watching this video today and being sure that you take this test right. All right, I'll see you soon.